everybody! Today we're going to be talking about creating these gorgeous watercolor backgrounds without any watercolor. Gasp! I know, but it's really easy. All you need, I'm going to show you two techniques. So today we're going to show you some with food coloring and some with Crayola markers. So let's get started. First up will be the food coloring backgrounds. So you'll need a brush, your food coloring, a tray to put the food coloring in so you can dip your brush into it, a paper towel, some watercolor paper, and I'm also going to show you how to create these backgrounds on a canvas. This technique is super simple. First, just think about what colors you want to combine. I typically do yellows and reds and pinks, so I can get some oranges in there, and then combine some yellow and green, yellow and blue. You can also do some pinks, purples, yellows. You just go crazy and experiment little by little, and you'll find some color combinations that you like most. If you want to create more of a galaxy feel, you can also add some black into the mix to make it a little darker in some areas, so that way when you go to add your little constellations and white details, it'll pop out even more since it's such a dark contrast to the white. As with most watercolor, it just takes some patience. There's no crazy trick here. It's just about combining both colors on the canvas. In this one in particular, in this canvas, which is great because sometimes you don't want to do it on watercolor paper, or you want to do it on a different kind of material. This canvas doesn't warp like watercolor paper does, and you'll see that in the later videos when I use some watercolor paper. When it's so highly saturated with water or liquid, it tends to curl up a bit. You have to wait for it to dry and then maybe put it underneath a book or two to flatten it out. So canvas is awesome, especially with this food coloring. It stays vibrant and it's beautiful. It takes a little bit to dry. It takes a lot longer than paper, but with that means that you can work through all your colors. So if there are any alterations you want to do as you're going through, the good thing is that you can go ahead and add, a lighter color, a darker color, that you can adjust your background since it stays wet for a little longer. This canvas in particular is the Artist Loft brand, which is sold at Michael's. I haven't really tried any others, but I'm pretty sure the technique will be the same throughout. The food coloring stains it really, really well, so I highly recommend even grabbing a small one and testing it out. It's great, especially for these big pieces, because food coloring isn't very expensive, so you don't have to use up a ton of watercolor on this giant canvas to get a beautiful outcome. Remember, it's always good to work in small chunks. So grab one of your colors, you're going to put some of it down. As your brush starts running out of color, add some water to it, and take that water before grabbing more ink to add to what you just put down on the canvas or paper. It helps really kind of mute it out, so you're not having just like a really dark splotches all over the place. And then grab your second color, start it off in a brand new spot without any paint on it, and then slowly work your way towards the previous color that you just put down. And that's how you just blend them together. Remember, you do want to mix the two colors that you're adding, or three, or however many you're going to put on your canvas, but always make sure that you clean your brush every so often so you can get those original colors popping through. Like on this canvas in particular, when it's done, it's going to be mostly oranges and it's like a really dark pink, but you'll see like bursts of that yellowish orange come through, and those are areas where I kind of just put it down and try to leave it alone, so that way it'd have some nice contrast and it just wouldn't all be one color together, which is a really easy thing to do. I used to do it too, and I still do sometimes when I'm not really paying attention and I get excited about one color. I'll start mixing them too much in one area, and that whole area just starts to look like one flat color instead of a whole bunch of different colors together. But if you do, that's fine. Just re-wet the area if it's dried, or in this case, if it's still wet, just grab whatever color is not in the one concentrated block and just add a few dabs in between with some water, so that way you can kind of give it some more variation. When you've completed all your color, you can easily leave it like that if you're really happy with it. I tend to add a little bit of white or white spots kind of to give it some more texture, some more intrigue, and it looks really nice. The white that I'm using here is going to be the Dr. P.H. Martin's Hydrus watercolors. These come in a really big pack. I found them at Michael's, local art stores. I know you can find them online. They have all kinds of sizes and colors. This one's really good because it's a little more watered down, and it has a little eyedropper, so you can easily grab some, put some, and just, as I did on this big one, I put a bunch of big drops, then took my wet brush and dabbed them into the dots, and then further flick the page with them, or excuse me, the canvas. So that way it would have more of a random pattern. And since the canvas is still wet, the dots aren't going to be this super bright in your face white that are going to get in your way, especially because usually when you're doing these backgrounds, you're going to then letter or draw on top of them. By combining that white ink with water and kind of throwing them onto the paint while it's still wet allows the white to bleed into the other colors and not be so bright and in your face. And then once all that dries and you do all your lettering, if you want to add actual bright white spots and all that stuff, you can, but at least you have your base where it's a little more muted. This particular brush that I'm using is just one I picked up at a gift shop from an art museum. It's really cool because the other end is a pencil, but I refuse to sharpen it because it's so beautiful. I don't want to damage it. But you can really use any brush. Using one with a bigger tip than what I normally would letter with, which have much smaller, thinner tips, is easier for me because I can cover more ground, so it's a little faster. But you can use whatever you want, whatever you're comfortable with. If you guys have any suggestions, I'd love to know if you have a specific brush that you like to do these backgrounds in. I always love to try new products. On the canvas, in order to get the white on there, I kind of just drop some of the white with the eyedropper, and then I grab the brush and kind of flick the brush onto the canvas. But you can also do a different technique, which you'll see me do in the following one on the actual watercolor paper, where you can grab just the ledge of something, get your brush and saturate it with white and with water. And remember, when you're using that white, always add some extra water into it, because if it's too thick, it's not going to splatter. It's just going to stay on your brush, and if it goes down onto whatever you're doing, it's going to be like in really thick splotches, and it's not going to look very nice. So always make sure to add a little bit of water because it helps it move a lot better through the brush. You can grab any sort of edge. I usually do like the edge of the bottle cap or the bottle, or if you have like a ruler, a plastic ruler, and you just need to go ahead and run the bristles downward towards your paper so it can give it that splatter effect. And you'll have to move it around. It does tend to make a little bit of a mess if you get a little too excited, so make sure you have enough space in your area and you don't mind what's getting dirty, because I've gotten it on my clothes or on the table. None of the tables in my apartment are sacred. I've pretty much gotten ink or paint on every surface in here, which is fine. It's usually on me anyways. Next, we'll be working on the second technique that I use to create these backgrounds. You'll need watercolor paper, a water cup, a paper towel or two, and whatever water-based marker you'll be using. It needs to be water-based. I usually use Crayola markers, but you'll see I use a different brand later on in the video. They can't be alcohol-based markers like Copics or Prismacolor markers because it simply won't work. They have to be water-based in order for this technique to work. The last thing you'll need is a Ziploc bag or just any kind of plastic bag, doesn't matter what brand it is. First, you're going to choose the colors you want to combine. Put those off to the side, grab your first one, and just start rubbing the marker onto the bag. Do it in little patches and try to spread it out evenly, so when we do end up adding this to the paper, one color doesn't stay focused in one area unless you want that. So just add each color one by one until you fill up most of the bag. Once you've gotten all those colors down, you're going to go ahead and set the bag aside, grab your brush and dip it into the water, and you're just going to dab or fling small dots of water or big patches of water. You're just going to want to put water all over the paper. You don't want to saturate it all at once. You want it to have some spaces that are dry, just so when we add the color onto it, it kind of creates a cooler effect than if you were to just put everything all down on like one solid sheet of wet paper. Once you have your water down, you're going to go ahead and take the Ziploc bag that you just added full of color and put it color side down onto where your water is. You're going to put that straight down and then massage the bag with your fingers to move the color around. Because you have some dry spots, sometimes it won't reach, so that way you can kind of spread the water around with the color, and you'll notice the color is then transferring down to the paper. Once you're satisfied, you can lift it up. If you see that maybe you left some color behind, you can just put it right back down and kind of move it around. You'll see me throughout the rest of this particular page. I'll lift it up and put it back down many times because I'll miss some spots, but that's fine because the whole point is for you to have this random color pattern, so it works really well. I use a small Ziploc bag because sometimes this technique can get a little hard to control, so I don't like to use like the really, really big ones on big paper. As you see, I will just do it multiple times to get a whole sheet covered if the Ziploc bag is smaller than the canvas that I'm using or the paper that I'm using. My water is green, and that was a mistake, but it was a happy accident. I had not changed the water inside the water cup from the previous post, so every time I put my water down, it had a little bit of green to it, but it actually worked out really, really well. So I hadn't even thought of doing that before, so yay, we discovered something in this process. If you want to add another color into it, you can just take your brush and dip it into a little bit of ink and spread it around the water cup, so that way when you pick up that water, it has a little bit of color, excuse me, like what you see there. So it's really, really nice. Really happy that happened. Once I go through one pass with a Ziploc, I'll go ahead and wipe it down just so I can do the second pass without having any of the water interfere, because sometimes when you have water on the bag itself and you go to add the marker onto it again, it doesn't really work very well. So just wipe it down and you can just reuse it for that one piece over and over again. Any areas that you want to manually touch up, just take your brush and kind of add some water into it and just kind of blend stuff together if it didn't blend together well, and you can just do small touch-ups without really affecting the overall look of the piece with your brush. You'll have to go over a few times. With this technique, Crayola markers some colors are very light, so if you want a darker background, you'll just have to go in and maybe do it a few times. You can let it dry and just layer upon layer on top of it. In this case, I just grabbed the same kind of colors, but they're darker versions, and went ahead and did second pass, and I'm much happier with that one because it stands out a lot more, and it's really nice to have that light base layer because they do blend together. This was still a little wet, so they still combine, but you can either do it while it's still wet, or you can wait for your first layer to completely dry and then add more on top. To add the white splotches and random patterns to the background, I'm still doing it while it's still wet, so I can get that bleed effect, and that's a much lighter white. And if you notice here, I'm holding the bottle a little better so you can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm not using any of the ink that's inside the bottle, I'm just using the ledge of it, so don't think I'm like scooping ink out onto the page. I actually have the white ink down in the little in a little tray that I can dip my brush into, but first I'll dip it into water, dip it into the white, and then use the edge of that bottle to spray and splatter onto the paper. This last video is just to show you that I have some other water-based markers. These are a little more expensive than Crayola's. They're Marvy color and brush markers. They work beautifully to write with, but I love them because their ink inside, the colors are so vibrant and like bright, so they work really, really well. I purchased them last year at Michael's in their coloring book section, but I don't believe they have them there anymore. I've seen them at Hobby Lobby, and I know I've seen them on websites. I want to thank you all for watching. Let me know if you have any questions or comments below, and happy lettering!